Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, An Unexpected Invitation. It was a languid afternoon in Bombay, and Hercule Poirot, that small, immaculately dressed man with the perfectly waxed moustache and eyes as sharp as needles, sat contentedly on the veranda of the Taj Mahal Hotel. Below him, the sea shimmered like molten silver, and the cries of vendors drifted through the humid air. His latest case, a matter involving an emerald necklace, a deceitful governess, and an unfortunate parrot, had ended most satisfactorily. He had planned to spend at least a week resting his petite cellules grises, and perhaps sampling the local delicacies under the careful guidance of the chef, who had promised him an authentic Goan fish curry made avec amour. But, as Poirot often observed, peace rarely lasts for long when one's reputation is that of the world's greatest detective. That afternoon, the hotel porter approached with a slight bow, holding a sealed envelope of thick, cream-colored paper. The red wax bore a distinct crest, an English lion and crown, slightly faded by age. Poirot's brows rose with curiosity. "Merci, my friend," he said, taking the envelope delicately between two fingers as though it might contain a clue in itself. The handwriting was elegant and deliberate, the kind of hand produced by a man of the old world, a man of authority. He slit the seal with his penknife and unfolded the letter. Tamarind House, Madurai. October 4th. Monsieur Hercule Poirot. I have heard of your remarkable abilities from my old acquaintance, Colonel Willoughby, and I now find myself in dire need of such skill. A matter of great delicacy has arisen, one involving not only theft, but sacrilege and, I fear, danger of a most unholy kind. An heirloom of my family, known locally as the Bell of Madurai, has vanished under circumstances I can scarcely explain. It is an ancient bronze temple bell, once gifted by a local ruler to my ancestor during the days of the company. To our family, it has been a symbol of honor and protection for generations. Now it is gone, and with it, peace from this house. There are whispers of curses, strange noises at night, and a dread I cannot banish. I implore you, Monsieur Poirot, to come to Madurai with all haste. You will find accommodation ready at Tamarind House, and my gratitude assured. Yours sincerely, Sir Reginald Haversham. Poirot leaned back in his chair, fingertips pressed together in his familiar attitude of reflection. Sacrilege, unholy danger, strange noises, he murmured. But it is the word vanished that intrigues me most. A bell, mon Dieu, or a thing of bronze and weight. It cannot simply disappear. He stood, gazing out at the Arabian Sea. So, my rest is again postponed. But perhaps the gods of India have conspired to provide Hercule Poirot with a new puzzle, and in Madurai, no less. A place of temples, legends, and mystery. It will be instructive. Within an hour, his decision was made. He sent a telegram to Sir Reginald confirming his arrival and instructed the hotel staff to pack his valise with characteristic precision. He allowed himself one evening stroll along the marine drive, where the sea breeze played softly with his moustache. Even in rest, he said quietly to himself, the little grey cells must not grow lazy. The journey south. The next morning, Poirot boarded the southbound train to Madurai. The first-class carriage was old but comfortable, with polished teak panels and brass fittings that gleamed like gold. Across from him sat a kindly missionary couple who spoke of the monsoon and the trials of travel. Poirot listened politely, offering a few mild remarks, but his mind was already far away, picturing the mysterious estate of Sir Reginald Haversham and the vanished bell that had once rung through temple halls. Outside, the landscape unfolded like a painted scroll, dusty plains, rice fields glistening under rain, clusters of palm trees swaying against a backdrop of distant hills. As the train pushed deeper into the south, the air grew heavier with the scent of jasmine and wet earth. Poirot took out Sir Reginald's letter again. He examined the paper, the ink, even the faint indentation where the writer's hand had pressed too firmly. A man of precision, he muttered. And yet, there is fear beneath the formality. Something disturbs him beyond the loss of a mere object. He turned the letter over and noticed a faint brown smudge at the corner, perhaps a trace of rust, perhaps something else. Poirot's eyes glinted. Bronze dust, he whispered. Interesting. At every small station, he observed the people on the platform, merchants, travellers, monks, and beggars. He admired the colours, the rhythm of the land, and yet his mind was absorbed by the question that always guided him: why? Why had Sir Reginald written in such urgency, and what lay behind this so-called curse? Night fell as the train wound its way through the hills of Dindigul. Poirot dozed lightly, lulled by the clatter of wheels and the occasional cry of a distant bird. In his dream, a bell tolled softly, a deep, mournful sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. When he awoke, dawn had broken. The train had slowed, and out of the mist rose the city of Madurai, ancient, sprawling, its skyline dominated by the towering gopurams of the Meenakshi temple, their surfaces carved with gods, demons, and elephants. It was a sight both majestic and strange. Poirot stepped onto the platform, adjusting his hat. A chauffeur awaited him with a placard bearing his name. The man bowed. "Monsieur Poirot? I am Choco, Sir Reginald's butler. The car is waiting." As they drove through the city, Poirot took in every detail, the flower markets alive with colour, the priests moving through the temple gates, the soft sound of bells carried on the morning breeze. Somewhere among them, he thought, was a clue, for the bells of Madurai did not ring without reason. The road wound out of the city and into a grove of tamarind and banyan trees. After half an hour, the car came to a stop before a grand but time-worn mansion. White walls streaked with moss, tall windows shuttered against the light, and an air of melancholy grandeur that seemed to weigh upon the very air. Above the arched doorway, carved into stone, were the words, "Tamarind House, 1832. Poirot stepped out and surveyed the building with keen eyes. "Ah," he murmured softly, "a place where time and sorrow have dined together." At the entrance, a tall figure appeared, Sir Reginald Haversham himself. His back was straight, though his hair was white as ash. His eyes, though sharp, held the look of a man haunted. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, extending a trembling hand, "thank you for coming. You arrived not a moment too soon." Poirot bowed slightly. "The pleasure, Sir Reginald, is mine. I understand we are to investigate not only theft, but something more spiritual." Sir Reginald's lips twitched. "Spiritual, perhaps. Or infernal. You will see soon enough." As they entered the cool, dim hall of Tamarind House, Poirot felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. A grand staircase loomed ahead, portraits of long-dead Havershams lining the walls. Somewhere in the distance, a faint echo resounded, like the toll of a bell, soft but distinct. Poirot paused, eyes narrowing. "Ah," he whispered. "So the case begins." Chapter 2, The Haversham Estate. Tamarind House stood like an aging monarch, proud, dignified, but unmistakably touched by decay. Its columns were streaked with moss, its shutters worn and splintered by the monsoon winds. Yet beneath the neglect, one could still glimpse the grace of its former splendor, polished floors, high ceilings, and the lingering scent of sandalwood that whispered of wealth and history. Poirot followed Sir Reginald through the entrance hall, his small patent leather shoes making neat, deliberate clicks on the marble floor. Above them hung a great portrait, a British officer in scarlet uniform standing beside an Indian nobleman. Beneath it, a brass plaque read, "The Gift of Friendship, 1796. Sir Reginald paused before it, his expression tightening. "My great-grandfather, Colonel Arthur Haversham," he said. It was during his time that the Maharaja of Madurai presented him with the bronze temple bell, the Bell of Madurai, as we came to call it. A token of gratitude, or so the story goes. Poirot studied the painting. A handsome gentleman, though the moustache is a poor imitation of mine, he murmured. Then his eye shifted to the Indian figure beside him, the Maharaja, his hand resting upon a small bronze bell at his feet. Ah, Poirot said softly. The relic itself. Sir Reginald nodded. Yes. For generations, it hung in the gallery upstairs. Until last week. They entered a drawing room where the shutters filtered the sunlight into narrow bands. A large grandfather clock ticked solemnly in the corner, marking time like a stern witness. A tray of untouched tea sat upon a table. Sit, Monsieur Poirot, Sir Reginald said wearily. You must hear the whole business before meeting the others. Poirot settled gracefully into a chair. I am all attention, my dear Sir Reginald. The old man rubbed his temples. 3 nights ago. The bell vanished. The gallery door was locked, the windows barred. The servants swear they heard nothing. In the morning, when my wife went to dust the relics, the pedestal stood empty. Poirot leaned forward. A locked room disappearance, eh? But objects, unlike spirits, do not vanish into air. Sir Reginald gave a dry smile. Indeed. Yet there is more. Since that night, there have been strange occurrences. The servants claim to hear the bell toll at midnight. My wife believes the house is cursed. And, though I am not a fanciful man, I confess that the atmosphere here has grown oppressive. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And who resides in the house besides yourself and Lady Haversham? Sir Reginald sighed. Ah, the household. It is as tangled as the roots of the banyan tree, I fear. You will see for yourself at dinner. The household. That evening, the lamps were lit early, for the monsoon clouds had rolled low across the horizon. Poirot dressed with his usual care, grey suit pressed to perfection, tie immaculate, shoes shining. As he descended the staircase, he took in every creak of the boards, every faint trace of scent or dust. A house, he knew, spoke more truly than its owners. In the dining hall, the family awaited him. At the head of the table sat Sir Reginald, dignified but frail, his eyes sharp with the brittle light of a man who has seen too much. Beside him sat Lady Eleanor Haversham, strikingly beautiful, a woman in her early 30s with fair hair and anxious eyes that darted like a bird's. She greeted Poirot warmly but with nervous fingers that twisted her napkin. Madam, Poirot said, bowing slightly, your house is most impressive, though it has, perhaps, an air of melancholy. She smiled faintly. Yes, Monsieur Poirot. Melancholy, that is the word for Tamarind House. Across from her sat Colonel Armitage, a large, red-faced man with a booming voice and a laugh that came too readily. Good to have you here, sir. I've read of your exploits in the papers. Dashed good thing Reginald called you in. Can't have these natives playing tricks with sacred relics, what? Poirot inclined his head politely but said nothing. He disliked men who laughed too loudly at dinner. Further down the table was Miss Lila Menon, a young Indian woman in a simple white sari. Her eyes were calm, intelligent, and observant, the kind of eyes Poirot respected. She was introduced as a scholar from the University of Madras, engaged to catalogue the estate's antiques. She spoke little, but when she did, her words were measured and precise. Finally, there was Edward Haversham, Sir Reginald's son, a lean, dark-haired man in his early 40s, whose charm could not quite conceal bitterness. His voice carried a touch of mockery when he said, "Another detective for father's collection of curiosities." "Not another, monsieur," said Poirot smoothly. "The detective." Edward smirked, and Lady Eleanor shot him a warning glance. Poirot filed that exchange neatly away in his memory. The conversation turns. As dinner progressed, Poirot allowed the others to speak while he observed the words, the silences, the looks exchanged. He noticed how Edward's eyes lingered on Lady Eleanor, how she avoided them. He noticed how Colonel Armitage's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his wine. And he noticed Sir Reginald's constant glance toward the door, as though expecting something unseen to enter. At one point, Poirot said lightly, "Tell me, Sir Reginald, this bell, what is its history?" Sir Reginald's spoon clinked against his bowl. "Old tales, nothing more. The Maharaja who gifted it claimed it had been hung in the Temple of Justice, where, it was said, the guilty heard its toll before punishment. My grandfather dismissed it as superstition. But since it vanished, I am less sure." Lady Eleanor whispered, "The night it disappeared, I awoke to the sound of a bell. It was faint, but clear, one single toll, just before midnight. I thought it a dream." Colonel Armitage barked a laugh. "A dream, yes. Or a trick of the servants." But Poirot saw the flicker of unease in the Colonel's eyes. "The servants," Poirot said softly, "they are frightened." Choco, the butler, who stood discreetly behind the Colonel's chair, bowed slightly. "Yes, Sahib. Some will not go near the gallery after dark. They say the bell spirit walks." Poirot smiled faintly. "Then I shall walk there myself, and perhaps meet this spirit." There was an awkward silence, broken only by the hiss of rain against the shutters. A hint of fear. After dinner, Sir Reginald led Poirot to the gallery. The corridor was long, its walls lined with relics, porcelain vases, ivory carvings, and portraits of solemn ancestors. At the end stood a plinth draped in a silk cloth. It was empty. "The bell stood there," said Sir Reginald, his voice low. "For 50 years I saw it each morning. Now there is nothing." Poirot bent close to the plinth. A faint circular mark stained the wood, tinged with green. He touched it delicately. "Verdigris," he murmured. "The corrosion of bronze." So it rested here long, and was moved in haste. He stepped to the window. The shutters were locked. The key lay untouched in the latch, the hinges rusted. Outside, the wind rattled the branches of the banyan trees. Poirot straightened. "It is curious, Sir Reginald. You say the door was locked, the windows barred, and yet the bell is gone. There is, I think, some trick of the mind, or of the heart, at work here." Sir Reginald's face was drawn. "You believe, then, that someone in this house—" Poirot's eyes gleamed in the lamplight. "I believe, monsieur, that where there is secrecy, there is motive. And in Tamarind House, I smell both secrecy and fear." As he turned to leave, a sudden gust rattled the shutters, and somewhere deep in the house a faint metallic echo rang, a single, hollow note, like the toll of a bell. Sir Reginald gripped the wall. "You hear it too?" Poirot inclined his head calmly. "Yes. The bell that is gone, and yet not silent." He smiled faintly. "It seems, my friend, that your house wishes to speak." Chapter 3, Shadows of the Past. Rain fell heavily upon Tamarind House, turning the gardens into silver-grey pools. The sound of it upon the tiled roof mingled with the mournful cries of peacocks from the nearby grove. Hercule Poirot stood by the window of his guest room, peering thoughtfully through the misted glass. The house was quiet, too quiet, he thought, for a place so full of life and fear. He had spent the morning examining the gallery once more, taking measurements with the precision of a jeweler. His eyes missed nothing, not the faint scratches near the plinth, nor the thin film of bronze dust that clung to the floorboards, nor even the slight imbalance of the window frame, which suggested it had been tampered with in the past. Poirot murmured to himself, "A heavy bell of bronze cannot vanish by magic. It is taken, or it is hidden. ABN." we shall see which. At 10 o'clock, he made his way to Sir Reginald's study. The old man sat behind a large rosewood desk, a pile of correspondence before him, though his hands trembled too much to write. The storm had unsettled him. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice strained. "You will forgive me if I am poor company. This wretched weather stirs up the worst memories. My wife says it is my nerves, but—" Poirot raised a hand gently. "Say no more, monsieur. The mind, when burdened by fear, plays strange tricks. But perhaps you will indulge me with some facts. Tell me, when was the bell last seen by anyone other than yourself?" Sir Reginald leaned back, frowning. "3 nights before it vanished. Miss Menon was cataloguing the relics. I joined her briefly, she was copying the inscription on the bell. Afterwards, I locked the gallery as always and kept the key in my pocket. That night, however, I suffered a fainting spell. Lady Eleanor sent for the doctor from the town. The next morning, the bell was gone." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And the key, Sir Reginald, where was it?" "In my dressing-gown pocket," the old man said slowly. "But I recall little of that night. I had taken a sedative." "Ah," Poirot said softly. "So the opportunity was open to any who might borrow the key." He paused, glancing at the mantelpiece where a clock ticked softly beside a framed photograph, a younger Sir Reginald with a dark-haired woman and a small boy. "Your late wife?" he asked. "Yes. My first wife, Margaret. She died here 30 years ago. The boy, Edward, was 10 at the time." Poirot's gaze lingered. "A house such as this, it remembers. Grief leaves footprints, n'est-ce pas?" Sir Reginald sighed. "I sometimes think this house holds too many ghosts." The search for clues. Poirot next sought out Miss Lila Menon in the library. She was seated at a long table, surrounded by stacks of brittle papers and catalogues. Her composure impressed him, she seemed immune to the tension that hung over Tamarind House like mist. "Ah, Mademoiselle Menon," Poirot began with a courteous bow, "I intrude, perhaps. But I come with curiosity, not suspicion." She smiled faintly. In a detective's vocabulary, the two are rarely separate. "Touché," Poirot said, eyes twinkling. "Tell me, you studied the bell. You copied its inscription." "Yes," she said, turning a notebook toward him. On the page, in neat handwriting, were the words, "He who tolls this bell in deceit shall summon his own doom." Poirot pursed his lips. A poetic warning, perhaps intended to deter thieves. And yet, he tapped the page thoughtfully. "What did you make of it?" Lila hesitated. "I think the bell was never meant for worship. It belonged to the Temple of Justice, where criminals once confessed their sins before punishment. The legend says that when the bell tolled falsely, it broke." "Très intéressant," murmured Poirot. "A relic of judgment. A symbol of truth. How fitting, then, that it should vanish in a house where every face hides something." Lila looked up sharply. "You think the culprit is among us?" Poirot smiled gently. "In any good mystery, mademoiselle, the answer is always within." A whisper in the rain. Later that afternoon, Poirot crossed the long veranda to the servants' quarters, his umbrella neatly poised. Choco, the butler, received him nervously. The man was loyal, but his eyes held unease. "Monsieur," he said, wringing his hands, "this house, it is not well. The bell spirit is angry. Last night, near midnight, I heard it toll. Once, twice, softly, like someone breathing through metal." Poirot's expression did not change. "And where were you when you heard this?" "In my room, below the gallery." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Below the gallery, just so. You did not investigate. Choco shook his head vigorously. No, Sahib. I prayed. This bell, it brings misfortune. Poirot sighed softly. Superstition is the refuge of fear. But fear can be useful, it tells us who trembles at truth. He thanked Choco and returned indoors. The storm had worsened. The air inside the mansion felt heavy, charged, as though the walls themselves were listening. At dusk, Poirot met Lady Eleanor in the parlour. She sat by the fire, her face pale in the flickering light. You are afraid, madam, he said gently. Afraid? She gave a brittle laugh. Yes. Of this house. Of what it holds. Poirot sat opposite her. Tell me you loved your husband once. Her eyes filled with tears. He is a good man, but he belongs to the past. This house is his temple. He sees ghosts where there are none, and now I do too. Last night, I thought I heard it again, the bell. It sounded from the east corridor, where no one walks. Poirot leaned forward. The east corridor leads to the gallery, she whispered. And to my husband's old study. He noted this carefully. Madam, sometimes guilt tolls louder than any bell. If one listens too long, it begins to sound real. She turned away. You think me mad? Poirot shook his head. None, madam. I think you are haunted, not by spirits, but by secrets. The midnight toll. That night, Poirot retired early, but not to sleep. He arranged his dressing gown and slippers beside the bed, his small revolver within reach, though he rarely used such crude instruments. He placed his pocket watch on the table and waited. At 11:30, the storm began to fade. The house grew still. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound. Tunning. A single deep note, distant yet resonant. Poirot sat upright, every nerve alert. The sound came again, nearer this time. He slipped from bed, lit his candle, and stepped into the corridor. The air was cool and damp, the silence immense. As he passed the gallery, he saw a flicker of light through the crack beneath the door. Carefully, he turned the handle. The door was locked. A small smile touched his lips. Tiens. The room that was locked is locked still. Yet light escapes. He knocked sharply. No answer. He listened, nothing but the wind outside. Then, faintly, he heard it again, the low, mournful toll of the missing bell. Très bien, he murmured. Now we progress. The morning after. At dawn, Poirot found fresh footprints outside the gallery, small, narrow, and distinctly feminine. They led to the balcony that overlooked the ravine. He examined the edge with care. There were no scuff marks, no rope fibers, only the faint impression of someone having stood very still in the rain. He knelt, brushing away the dirt. Something glinted faintly, a tiny fragment of bronze, green with age. Ah, he said softly, pocketing it. The bell may not be gone so far after all. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the clouds, Poirot straightened, moustache immaculate despite the damp. Somewhere in the distance, a temple bell rang for morning prayers, pure, serene, and real. But within Tamarind House, he thought, another bell was ringing still, a bell of guilt, echoing through the hearts of those who heard it. Chapter 4. Our Death in the Night. The rain had passed by dawn, leaving the air heavy with damp earth and the scent of jasmine. The servants moved quietly through Tamarind House, whispering of omens and curses. Even the bird seemed hesitant to sing. Hercule Poirot, ever the early riser, was taking his breakfast on the veranda. A small cup of coffee, a slice of toast cut into perfect triangles, and a single boiled egg, symmetry in all things. He was deep in thought, turning over the fragments of the previous night, the light beneath the locked gallery door, the mysterious tolling, the feminine footprints on the balcony. He was so absorbed that he almost missed the sound, a scream, shrill and sudden, cutting through the morning stillness. Then came the pounding of hurried feet and Choco's voice, high and panicked. "Sahib! Sahib! Come quickly! The Colonel, he is dead!" Poirot rose at once, setting down his cup with immaculate calm. "Ah," he murmured. "So the bell has claimed its first listener. The discovery." Colonel Armitage's room was on the west wing, overlooking the overgrown gardens. When Poirot arrived, the scene was already chaos. Lady Eleanor stood by the doorway, pale and trembling. Edward Haversham had pushed past the servants and was pacing furiously. Miss Lila Menon stood apart, her hands clasped tightly. Sir Reginald was not there. The butler whispered that he had not yet been told. The Colonel lay sprawled beside his bed, still in his nightclothes. His face was frozen in an expression of terror, eyes wide, mouth slightly open as though he had seen something dreadful in his final moments. His hand was clenched tightly around the bedsheet, and his skin had a strange hue, pale, with a faint greenish tinge. Poirot bent beside the body, his eyes sharp and searching. He did not touch anything at first, he simply looked. His gaze moved from the man's shoes to the bedside table, then to a half-empty glass of whiskey. "Who found him?" he asked. Lady Eleanor spoke in a whisper. "It was I. I came to ask after his cough. He had been unwell since the rain began. I knocked, but there was no answer. Then I entered and found him like this." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "You did well to send for me at once, madam." Edward, agitated, said it must have been his heart. The man drank like a fish. Always boasting he'd outlive us all, and now look. Poirot examined the Colonel's wrist. "You may be correct, monsieur," he said softly. "Yet the good Colonel's heart, I think, did not fail him naturally." He pointed with a gloved hand. Around the wrist was a faint stain, not blood, but something darker, metallic. "Bronze." "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured. "The color of the missing bell." The investigation begins. By the time the local doctor arrived, a nervous, bespectacled man from the city, Poirot had already noted every detail worth noting. The doctor, after a brief examination, announced, "Heart failure, most likely." He may have been startled or frightened. Poirot smiled thinly. "Ah, but frightened by what, doctor?" "That is the question." "A noise? A sight? A memory?" When the doctor left, Poirot asked that the room remain untouched. He then summoned Sir Reginald, who arrived leaning heavily on his cane, his face ashen. "Dead," he whispered when he saw the body. "Armitage dead? But how?" Poirot guided him gently to a chair. "Calm yourself, monsieur. Tell me, was the Colonel troubled recently? Any quarrel, any fear?" Sir Reginald hesitated. "He was uneasy, I think. He told me yesterday he had seen something, a shadow on the stairs near midnight. I laughed at him. Perhaps I should not have." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet it may not have been a shadow." Poirot's little grey cells at work. He spent the next hour alone in the Colonel's room, studying it from every angle. The whiskey glass contained a faint sediment, and Poirot sniffed it carefully. "Not poison," he murmured. "No bitterness. Perhaps a sedative, perhaps not." On the floor near the bed, almost invisible against the carpet, he found a single thread of gold silk. He examined it closely. "The weave of a woman's scarf, or perhaps a shawl," he muttered. "And who, I wonder, visited him last night wearing gold?" He pocketed the thread neatly. Then he noticed something else, a sheet of paper half tucked beneath the dresser. Pulling it free, he saw it was old, brittle parchment, torn from a larger document. In faded ink were the words, "Heir and curse intertwined, let the bell judge the unworthy." Poirot straightened slowly. "My's OUI. There is history here, and the history, it kills. The family reacts." That afternoon, Poirot assembled the household in the drawing room. The rain had ceased, but the air was still heavy, the mood tense. "Miss Amos," he said quietly, "our friend Colonel Armitage is dead. The cause, not yet certain. But there is more here than meets the eye. I ask only this, that no one leaves Tamarind House until my investigation is complete." Edward scoffed. "Are we prisoners, then?" Poirot regarded him coolly. "You are guests in a house where two crimes now dwell, theft and death. Until we discover the truth, monsieur, prudence demands order." Lady Eleanor shuddered. Do you think it was the curse?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "No, madam. Curses are convenient things, they serve to conceal guilt. Someone in this house has reason to wish Colonel Armitage dead." Miss Menon, who had been silent, spoke softly. "He quarrelled with Edward 2 nights ago." "About money?" Edward turned sharply. "That was nothing. A petty disagreement. You have no right." Poirot lifted a hand. "Peace, peace. I accuse no one, yet. But I must ask you all, who heard the bell last night?" There was a pause. Then Lady Eleanor whispered, "I did. Around midnight, just before the thunder. Only once, but it sounded so close." Sir Reginald nodded weakly. "I heard it too. I thought it a dream." Poirot bowed slightly. "It was no dream. I heard it also." The room fell silent. Even Edward looked shaken. Poirot's reflection. When the others had gone, Poirot lingered by the window. The garden shimmered in the fading light, the trees dripping rainwater like tears. He thought of the bell's inscription, "He who tolls this bell in deceit shall summon his own doom." He thought of the bronze stain on the colonel's wrist, the golden thread, the fragment of parchment, and the strange echo that haunted the house each night. In his notebook, he wrote 3 small lines. The bell sound equals fear, not fact. The colonel, frightened to death. Who gains by his silence? He closed the book. "The truth, she hides beneath superstition," he murmured. "But already I feel her breath." The ominous night. That evening, Poirot dined alone. Sir Reginald excused himself, claiming illness. Lady Eleanor retired early, and Edward stormed off to the study. Only Miss Menon passed through briefly, her expression distant, carrying a small oil lamp. "Be careful, mademoiselle," Poirot advised her gently. "The house is darker than it appears." "I am not afraid," she said quietly. "I only wish to finish my notes." Poirot watched her go. "Courage and knowledge, a dangerous combination," he murmured. Outside, thunder rolled again in the distance. The servants barred the doors and whispered prayers. And in the silence that followed, faint but distinct, came the echoing toll of a bell, 1, 2, 3 times, slow and solemn, like the counting of sins. Poirot looked up from his desk, his eyes shining with calm certainty. "Ah," he said softly, "it begins again. But next time, perhaps, the toll will not be for the guilty, but for the innocent." Chapter 5, The Labyrinth of Lies. Morning returned to Tamarind House with deceptive calm. The storm had passed, leaving a pale, golden light that fell through the carved shutters like bars of fire. Yet, beneath that tranquility, a taut unease lingered, the kind that clings to walls where death has walked. Poirot, immaculate as ever in a linen suit and silk cravat, descended the staircase after breakfast. He paused at the landing, gazing thoughtfully at the bronze niche where the bell once hung. The space seemed to mock him, empty, echoing, accusing. "The bell," he murmured, "she tolls not for the dead, but for the guilty." Poirot makes his rounds. His first call that morning was upon Lady Eleanor. She sat in the parlour, pale but composed, a strand of pearls trembling faintly at her throat. On a small table beside her lay an embroidery frame and a cup of untouched tea. Poirot bowed politely. "Madam, may I trouble you for a few minutes?" She smiled weakly. "Of course, Mr. Poirot. You must think us a dreadful household, first a theft, then a death." "On the contrary, madam," he said, settling gracefully into a chair, "I find you a most interesting household. Tell me, you were the first to discover Colonel Armitage?" "Yes. I went to his room at 7. He was already gone." Poirot leaned forward. "Forgive me, but tell me, last night, did you see anyone moving about the corridors after dark?" She hesitated. "No one. Only I thought I heard footsteps near the gallery. I assumed it was Edward." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "You thought so, but did you verify it?" She shook her head. "No. I was too frightened." "Ah," Poirot murmured, fear, the great blinder of eyes. He noticed, too, the silk shawl draped over the arm of her chair, golden in hue, shimmering faintly in the light. His gaze lingered just a fraction too long. "You like the color gold, madam?" he asked mildly. Her eyes flickered. "It was a gift from my husband, years ago." Poirot rose smoothly. "A fine choice, madam. But beware, gold, it can attract not only admiration, but also suspicion." He bowed and left her in quiet confusion. The son's restlessness. In the study, Edward Haversham sat brooding before an open window, a cigarette dangling from his fingers. A decanter of whiskey stood on the desk, half empty despite the early hour. When Poirot entered, Edward turned sharply. "If you come to accuse me again, save your breath." Poirot lifted a delicate hand. "Accuse? Mais non. I merely observe. You are restless, monsieur, impatient for something to end, or to begin." Edward scowled. "This whole business is absurd." The Colonel's heart gave out, and everyone talks of ghosts and curses. Poirot studied him. "You did not believe in the curse?" "Of course not. But my father does, always has. He thinks the bell protects this house." "Rubbish, I say." "And yet," said Poirot softly, "men have killed for less than protection. For pride, perhaps. Or inheritance." Edward's face darkened. "If you're hinting I had anything to gain?" "Calm yourself, mon ami. I hint at nothing. But tell me, what was your quarrel with the Colonel?" Edward's jaw tightened. "He accused me of mismanaging funds meant for the estate. He was drunk, as usual. Said I was a disgrace to my father's name." "And were you?" Poirot asked mildly. For a moment, Edward looked ready to strike him. Then he turned away, muttering, "Believe what you like." Poirot regarded him quietly. "I believe, monsieur, that anger can conceal fear, and fear can conceal guilt. Whether yours or another's, I do not yet know." He left Edward fuming, his cigarette trembling between his fingers. A conversation in the garden. In the shaded courtyard, Poirot found Miss Lila Menon, seated beneath a banyan tree, writing swiftly in a small notebook. Her expression was thoughtful, almost serene despite the tension that haunted the house. "Ah, mademoiselle," he greeted. "Always the scholar, even among murderers." She smiled faintly. "Work distracts the mind, Mr. Poirot." I was translating an inscription from the Haversham archives. Indeed? Perhaps you will indulge my curiosity. She turned the page towards him. In graceful handwriting were the words, "To strike the sacred bell is to bind the soul to truth." Poirot's eyes lit with interest. Fascinating. And do you think the bell's disappearance has unbound some truth instead? She looked away. Perhaps. The Colonel knew more than he admitted. He was prying into the family's records, especially those concerning the Maharaja's gift. "Ah," Poirot said softly. "And did he confide his discoveries to you?" She hesitated. "Not exactly. But he told me once that the bell's inscription was incomplete. That there was a second part, hidden away." Poirot's brows rose. "And where, mademoiselle, might one hide half a curse?" Her lips curved slightly. "In a place no Englishman would think to look." "Meaning?" Poirot pressed gently. "In the temple records," she said. "But those were sealed after the rebellion. No one has seen them in decades." Poirot nodded slowly. "Then perhaps, mademoiselle, someone has seen them now." Before she could reply, a voice called from the veranda, "Choco, the old servant." "Sahib. Sir Reginald asks for you, in the library." Poirot bowed to Miss Menon. "Merci, mademoiselle. We shall speak again soon." Sir Reginald's confession. The library smelled of old paper and dust. Sir Reginald sat in a high-backed chair, his cane resting beside him, a small decanter within reach. His face was drawn and grey. "Mr. Poirot," he began in a trembling voice, "I cannot bear this much longer. You must understand, the bell was not merely an ornament. It was a trust, a sacred gift. My great-grandfather promised it would never be moved." Poirot inclined his head. "And yet, someone moved it." The old man shuddered. "Yes. I believe that act unleashed misfortune upon us. But you, Mr. Poirot, you think in terms of crime, not curse. Tell me, was Armitage murdered?" Poirot looked at him steadily. "Yes, monsieur. Murdered by fear, a fear induced by human hands." Sir Reginald's knuckles whitened on the cane. "Then who? Who could?" Poirot raised a hand. "Patience. The truth, she grows like the tamarind tree, slowly, but with deep roots." He glanced around the room. On a shelf, among dusty ledgers, something caught his eye, a gap where a book should have been. A faint square of lighter wood marked its absence. "You keep good order, monsieur," Poirot remarked. "Except one volume missing. May I inquire?" Sir Reginald looked startled. "What?" "Oh, yes. An old ledger. Edward borrowed it last week, for estate accounts." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Estate accounts, or secrets? We shall see." A subtle discovery. That evening, while the household gathered for supper, Poirot returned briefly to the Colonel's room. He moved with deliberate care, his eyes missing nothing. On the writing desk lay the Colonel's pipe, cleaned but unused. Beneath it, a folded scrap of paper. He unfolded it delicately. 3 words were scrawled in an uneven hand. "The bell, she kills." Poirot stared at the message for a long moment. Then he smiled, not with amusement, but with understanding. "Non, mon pauvre Colonel," he whispered. "It was not the bell that killed you, it was what she revealed." The web tightens. When Poirot emerged, the wind had begun to rise again. The house moaned softly, timbers shifting like restless ghosts. From the dining hall came the clatter of silver and the low murmur of uneasy conversation. Poirot paused on the landing, looking down at them, Lady Eleanor, pale as parchment, Edward, sullen and watchful, Miss Menon, quietly observing, Sir Reginald, weary and defeated. He could feel the tension coiling like a snake beneath the surface. Each of them held a piece of the puzzle, and each of them, he suspected, had lied. He whispered to himself, a labyrinth of lies indeed. But soon, the path, she will clear. As he turned towards his room, a sudden sound froze him, a dull metallic echo, faint but unmistakable. 1, 2, 3 strokes of the missing bell, drifting through the corridor like a whisper from the grave. Poirot straightened, eyes blazing. The game, he murmured, is about to end. Chapter 6, The Shadows Deepen. The following morning dawned grey and airless, as if the storm had left behind its breath to haunt Tamarind House. The air hung heavy with moisture, carrying the scent of wet earth and decay. Somewhere beyond the tamarind trees, a peacock screamed, a sharp, mournful cry that echoed through the mist like a warning. Hercule Poirot stood before the long mirror in his room, adjusting his tie with precision. One must always face the day as one would face the truth, he murmured. Neatly, firmly, and without fear. Yet even he could not ignore the sense of unease that clung to the house. The servants moved silently, eyes downcast. Sir Reginald had taken to his bed, murmuring of ill omens, and Edward's temper had grown more erratic by the hour. Only Miss Menon retained her composure, though her quiet watchfulness seemed more guarded now. Poirot descended the stairs, his shoes clicking softly on the marble. He intended to begin his morning with an inspection of the gallery, that cursed upper floor where the bell had last hung. But before he could climb, a voice called to him from behind. "Mr. Poirot," said Lady Eleanor, her tone tremulous. "Might I speak with you privately?" He inclined his head. "Of course, madam." Lady Eleanor's fear. They walked into the drawing-room, where the air smelled faintly of rosewater and old dust. The morning light fell across Lady Eleanor's face, revealing deep lines of fatigue. Her hands trembled as she clutched a folded handkerchief. "I cannot rest," she began. "Every night I hear it, the bell. It comes closer, always closer." Poirot's eyes softened. "And you are sure it is not imagination, madam?" She hesitated. "At first, I thought so. But last night, when it tolled again, I went to the window. There was someone in the courtyard, a shadow moving toward the gallery." Poirot's voice dropped. "Did you recognize them?" "No, only that they carried something heavy. A bag or a small chest, perhaps." Poirot frowned slightly. "And you told no one?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Would they believe me? My husband speaks only of curses, Edward mocks me, and the servants," she broke off. "I thought perhaps you would understand." Poirot took her trembling hand gently. "Madam, you have done well to tell me. I assure you, whoever moves through this house by night, it is not a spirit. It is flesh and blood, and it fears discovery." At that moment, a noise sounded from the corridor, hurried footsteps, followed by a loud knock on the door. It was Choco, the old servant, his face pale with alarm. "Sahib," he gasped. "There has been another accident." Poirot's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened. "Take me there." The second attack. The scene this time was the gallery, long, shadowed, lined with portraits of stern-faced Havershams. Near the far end, beside the empty niche where the bell once hung, lay a fallen figure. It was Edward. He was breathing, but faintly. Blood trickled from a cut on his temple, and his right hand clutched a bronze chain, twisted and broken. A half-burnt candle lay beside him, its wax splattered across the floor. Poirot knelt at once, examining him with clinical precision. "Alive, thank heaven," he murmured. But struck from behind, yes, by something heavy and rounded. His eyes flicked toward the wall. "Aha! And note, the chain, it is bronze, from the bell itself." Lady Eleanor covered her mouth in horror. Then it was brought back. Poirot rose slowly. Perhaps, madam. Or perhaps it never truly left. He gestured for Choco. Fetch blankets, and send for the doctor at once. And no one is to leave this floor. As they carried Edward to his room, Poirot turned to study the gallery once more. The air smelled faintly of oil and smoke, as though a lamp had been extinguished in haste. On the floor near the niche, he saw footprints, small, narrow, unmistakably feminine. Poirot bent, examining them. The lady with the golden thread, he murmured. She walks again. The chain of evidence. By midday, Edward had regained partial consciousness. His speech was slurred, but he managed to whisper, I saw it, the bell, it swung by itself. Poirot leaned closer. No, my friend. You saw someone make it swing. Tell me, who was it? Edward's eyes rolled upward. Gold, a gold light, he murmured, then fell back into silence. Poirot frowned. Gold, again. Always gold. He stepped back and regarded Sir Reginald, who stood trembling at the foot of the bed. Your son is fortunate, monsieur. The blow could have been fatal. The old man nodded weakly. My family is cursed, Mr. Poirot. That bell. Enough of curses, Poirot interrupted sharply. Let us speak instead of guilt. Someone in this house tried to silence Edward. That means he saw something, or someone, he should not. He looked around. Lady Eleanor stood pale and silent, her eyes fixed on the floor. Miss Menon, standing by the doorway, looked unusually composed. Poirot's gaze lingered on her. Mademoiselle, you were not in your room last night, I think. She met his eyes calmly. No. I was in the library, working. The storm kept me awake. And did you see or hear anything? A shadow, she said softly. Crossing the courtyard. But it vanished before I could follow. Poirot nodded slowly. You are brave, mademoiselle, but perhaps too silent. Poirot's deduction begins. That afternoon, Poirot retreated to his study. He spread out his notes in perfect rows, the parchment fragment, the golden thread, the bronze stain, the chain, and the colonel's final note. He wrote 3 neat headings. The bell, symbol or weapon. The family, bound by lie or legacy. Fear, real or manufactured. He tapped his pen thoughtfully. The colonel was frightened into death, the son nearly silenced, and the bell, always the bell. But why remove it, only to return it? A knock interrupted him. Choco entered quietly, holding a small wooden box. I found this, Sahib, he said. Hidden under the stairs. Poirot took it. The box was old, carved with the Haversham crest. Inside lay scraps of torn parchment, records, perhaps, from the temple archives. And among them, one phrase caught Poirot's eye. The bell guards the unspoken sin of the giver. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, voila! The key! The bell was not cursed, it was a secret buried in bronze. He rose swiftly. Now we begin to see why men kill, not for gold, but for silence. The midnight visitor. That night, Poirot did not sleep. He sat by his lamp, notebook open, moustache perfectly brushed, waiting. Outside, the house lay in darkness. The only sound was the steady ticking of a clock somewhere below. Then, faintly, the sound he had been expecting. A creak of floorboards. A whisper of movement. The soft rustle of fabric. He rose without a sound and stepped into the corridor. A flickering light glowed near the gallery, a lantern, carried by a slender figure moving swiftly toward the niche. Poirot followed at a distance, each step measured, silent. The figure reached the end of the corridor and stopped. For a moment, it turned, and Poirot saw her face in the glow. "Lady Eleanor," he whispered. She was weeping. Her hands trembled as she reached toward the empty niche. And from beneath her shawl, she drew a small bronze bell, tarnished, ancient, unmistakable. But before she could strike it, Poirot's voice cut through the silence. "Stop, madam. One more toll, and you will summon not the spirit of the past, but your own ruin." She froze, the bell suspended in midair. "The truth nears." Poirot approached slowly, his voice soft but firm. "You have been the keeper of secrets too long, madam. But you are not the killer, no, no. You are only the frightened guardian." Lady Eleanor's tears spilled freely. "I wanted only to return it. It was never meant to be taken. But he found it, and then—" Poirot raised a hand. "Do not say more, not yet. The truth must be spoken when all can hear." He took the bell gently from her trembling hands. "Rest now, madam. Tomorrow, all shall be revealed." And as he turned away, the house groaned once more beneath the wind. Somewhere far below, the Real murderer moved in the shadows, unaware that the great Hercule Poirot was ready to strike. Chapter 7: The Unmasking. The morning broke pale and heavy, the light weak and uncertain, as if even the sun hesitated to touch Tamarind House. The storm had retreated at last, leaving a stillness so deep it seemed almost unnatural, the hush before the confession. In the grand dining room, the family gathered at Poirot's request. Sir Reginald sat in his armchair, fragile and sunken, his eyes red from sleeplessness. Lady Eleanor sat beside him, her golden shawl neatly folded on her lap. Edward stood by the window, sullen and silent, while Miss Lila Menon lingered near the far end of the table, her notebook clasped tightly in her hands. Poirot entered precisely at 9 o'clock, immaculate as ever, his shoes gleaming, his moustache immaculate, his gaze calm and unreadable. "Miss Amiss," he began, "thank you for your patience. It is time we lay the ghosts of Tamarind House to rest. There has been theft, deceit, and death, and all are bound by a single truth." He paused, letting the silence deepen. "But before we speak of truth, we must first destroy illusion. The web of deceit." Poirot moved to the head of the table. "Let us begin where it began, with the disappearance of the bell. A sacred gift, yes, but also a dangerous one. You see, this bell was more than bronze. It contained within its casting a record, a secret, of the wrong done by an ancestor of Sir Reginald." Sir Reginald stirred. I know of no such wrong." Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed, monsieur, you would not. The knowledge was buried long ago, kept from you by those who feared its power to disgrace the family. The colonel, ever the curious man, uncovered fragments of that truth. He found the parchment in the library, the same one you saw, Lady Eleanor." Lady Eleanor's lips parted in shock. "How did you know I saw it?" "Ah, madam," Poirot said gently, "because it was you who replaced it there after reading it. The edges were folded in your manner, the ink smudged with the scent of your perfume. You found it 2 nights before the murder, and you confronted the colonel, did you not?" She bowed her head. "He said he would tell Reginald. That he would make it known that our fortune came from betrayal." Poirot nodded. "Precisely. And that, madam, is why you feared him, but it is not why he died." Edward gave a short, bitter laugh. "You expect us to believe my mother capable of murder?" Poirot turned to him, eyes sharp. "Capable, perhaps, but not guilty. She hid the bell to protect her husband from the shame of that secret, believing it cursed. When it vanished from its niche, she concealed it, until guilt drove her to return it last night. Lady Eleanor whispered. I thought if I restored it, the curse would lift. Poirot smiled gently. None, madam. The curse is not upon the bell, but upon the silence that surrounds it. The Colonel's death revisited. Poirot paced slowly around the table. Let us turn to the death of Colonel Armitage. He died not of poison, nor of violence, but of terror, a terror carefully constructed. On the night of his death, someone placed the bronze chain about his wrist while he slept, so that when he awoke and saw it, he believed the bell's curse had claimed him. Miss Menon's eyes widened. But how could anyone know such a thing would frighten him to death? Poirot turned to her with a small, approving smile. Ah, mademoiselle, because they understood his weakness, his superstition. Only someone who knew both the history of the bell and the Colonel's fragile heart could have contrived such a scene. His gaze swept across the room, pausing on each face. The Colonel's glass of whiskey contained not poison, but a sedative. He awoke suddenly, half-dazed, saw the bronze chain glinting on his wrist, and heard, ah yes, the tolling of the bell. Lady Eleanor gasped. Then someone made the bell sound that night. Exactly, madam. Someone used a smaller bell, a replica, to create that illusion. Fear did the rest. The second attack. Poirot turned to Edward. You, monsieur, were attacked because you came too near to discovering the truth. You had borrowed the estate ledger, the one missing from the library, because it contained a note, a payment recorded long ago to a certain artisan in Madurai. Edward frowned. Yes. I thought it was an old temple account. Indeed, Poirot said softly. But it was not. It was hush money, a bribe paid to conceal the origin of the bell. And the person who struck you feared you would reveal that secret. Edward's eyes widened. Then it wasn't my mother. No, said Poirot, your attacker is far more cunning, and far closer than you imagine. Miss Menon's composure. The air in the room thickened. Poirot turned at last to Miss Lila Menon, who stood very still, her expression unreadable. Mademoiselle, he said softly, you are the scholar, the translator, the quiet observer. Yet you knew far more about the bell than you first admitted. You told me it bore an inscription, to strike the sacred bell is to bind the soul to truth. You said that the second half of that phrase was lost. She nodded calmly. It was. The temple records were sealed. Ah, said Poirot, but you opened them, did you not? You alone had the knowledge and the access. You discovered the second line, he who conceals the sin shall bear its weight in blood. A flicker passed over her face, the first sign of emotion. You found the papers, she said quietly. Yes, said Poirot, hidden beneath the stairs. You took them from the archives, and when the Colonel learned what they revealed, that the Haversham's ancestor stole the bell from its temple, you knew your research would be discredited if he told. So you frightened him into silence. Miss Menon's calm cracked for the briefest instant. You think I killed him? Poirot spread his hands. None. You killed no one, but your clever trick with the bell gave another the weapon they required. Someone heard your experiment that night, saw your fear play upon the Colonel's nerves, and decided to use it for their own gain. Then who? Lady Eleanor began. Poirot held up a finger. Patience, madam. The true killer hides not in fear, but in necessity. The one person who had everything to lose if the truth of the bell's origin came to light. He turned his gaze slowly to Sir Reginald. The patriarch's secret. The old man's breath caught. You cannot mean. Ah, but I can, said Poirot quietly. It was you who first discovered that the Colonel knew the truth. You confronted him, perhaps to beg his silence, and when he refused, you used the legend to terrify him. You placed the chain on his wrist and told the bell yourself. You believed you were only frightening him, but his heart failed. Sir Reginald's hands trembled violently. I wanted only to protect my family's honor. The secret was too great, too shameful. Precisely, said Poirot. And when Edward began to suspect you, you struck him too. Not to kill, perhaps, but to warn. The room was utterly still. Only the ticking of the clock filled the silence. Sir Reginald's cane slipped from his grasp and clattered to the floor. He whispered, I did not mean for death. Poirot bowed his head. No murderer ever does, monsieur. Yet death, once invited, rarely leaves quietly. The bell returns. Poirot stepped forward and placed the bronze bell upon the table. It gleamed faintly in the dim light, ancient and solemn. This, he said softly, has been both witness and weapon. But now, at last, she may rest. The secret is spoken, the guilt laid bare. Lady Eleanor wept quietly. Edward stood motionless, pale and shaken. Miss Menon closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer. Poirot turned toward the window. Outside, the clouds were lifting, and sunlight fell across the courtyard for the first time in days. He looked back at the family, weary, broken, but free from illusion. Tomorrow, he said gently, we shall call the authorities. But tonight, let us have peace. For the truth, she has rung her final note. Chapter 8, The Final Toll. The following morning dawned clear and golden, the air washed clean by the storm. Yet within Tamarind House, the stillness was thick, uneasy, the hush that lingers after a confession too simple, too convenient. Poirot took breakfast alone on the veranda, gazing toward the faint outline of the Meenakshi temple. He stirred his tea with delicate precision, his eyes distant, his mind clearly elsewhere. For though Sir Reginald's admission had ended the night's turmoil, it had not satisfied the little grey cells. Non, Poirot murmured softly to himself, there is still one note in this symphony that rings false. He had learned long ago that the human heart rarely confesses all. And this confession, neat, self-punishing, and strangely convenient, was too perfect. A man who caused death by accident does not speak with such clarity, he stammers, evades, pleads. Yet Sir Reginald had spoken like a man rehearsed. Poirot's doubt. By mid-morning, the house stirred. Edward appeared, pale but upright, and Lady Eleanor trailed behind, her eyes hollow from weeping. Miss Menon entered last, quiet as ever, her notebook now shut tight, as though afraid of the words it might still hold. Poirot rose courteously. Ah, Miss Amos, I have requested that none of you depart until we have completed a final conversation. There is but one small matter, one inconsistency, that troubles me. Lady Eleanor looked stricken. Must we endure more, Monsieur Poirot? My husband has confessed. Indeed, madam, Poirot said gently, and yet, I am not convinced he spoke the whole of his heart. There is, you see, something very curious about time. Time. Edward echoed. OUI. The Colonel's death occurred shortly after 11. Sir Reginald claimed to have visited him at 10:30. Yet the groundsman, Ramonajom, heard the bell sound at 11:15, and saw Sir Reginald walking in the opposite direction, toward the river. How, then, could he have tolled the bell at that moment? Lady Eleanor's eyes widened. But surely he could have returned. Poirot shook his head. He could not. The path was flooded and impassable. Non, the bell was struck by another, one who wished to make it seem Sir Reginald had done so. The true hand behind the curtain. A hush fell. Poirot's eyes, sharp and unblinking, turned toward Miss Lila Menon. You, mademoiselle, had both motive and means to strike that fatal note. You discovered the truth of the bell's origin, yes, but more than that. You found proof that Sir Reginald's ancestor had falsified temple records, profiting from stolen relics. You might have revealed it to the world, but your reputation as a scholar would have been ruined for theft from the archives. Miss Menon's face was pale, but composed. That is absurd. Why would I kill the Colonel? Poirot stepped closer, his voice soft but relentless. Because he mocked you. You confided your discovery to him, perhaps foolishly, and he dismissed you, called your research nonsense, accused you of superstition. You sought to frighten him, to prove your point, so you performed your little experiment with the chain and the bell. You meant it as a warning, but someone was listening. Who? She demanded, her composure slipping. Poirot's gaze flicked briefly to Lady Eleanor. The lady of the house. She saw you through the veranda window that night, saw how the Colonel's terror nearly broke him. And thus, she conceived the perfect plan. The lady's guilt. Lady Eleanor's lips parted in disbelief. You cannot mean me. Ah, madam, Poirot said quietly, who else had both opportunity and the calm of mind to use another's mistake as her weapon? You feared exposure, the shame of the secret, yes, but more than that, you feared the loss of everything, your position, your security, your husband's fragile mind. Her hands trembled in her lap. You have no proof. None. Poirot raised a finger. Then let us speak of perfume. The bronze chain upon the Colonel's wrist bore a faint scent, not sandalwood, as I first thought, but mimosa. Your scent, madam. It was you who placed the chain there after Miss Menon's experiment. You struck the small bell hidden in the alcove, one used for the servants' calls, to mimic the sacred toll. You wished to frighten him into silence, not to kill. But his heart was weak, and he died. Lady Eleanor pressed her hands to her face. I only wanted him to stop tormenting Reginald with his accusations. He said our family was cursed. Poirot's tone softened. And so, by your own hand, you gave life to that curse. You became the very thing you feared. Edward stood frozen, horror dawning in his eyes. Mother, you? She looked at her son with despair. It was an accident, Edward. I swear it was. The second crime. Poirot continued quietly, and yet, madam, you did not stop there. When Edward found the ledger, the one that recorded the bribe paid to silence the temple priests, you knew he might connect it to the Colonel's death. You followed him to the library that night and struck him from behind. Her breath caught. He was never meant to die, only to forget. Poirot nodded sadly. But the blow was nearly fatal. You hid the weapon, the bronze paperweight, from the desk, in the pond, where it remained until the storm washed the water clear. I found it this morning. The silence that followed was unbearable. Even Miss Menon seemed stunned, her hand pressed to her mouth. Lady Eleanor slumped in her chair, tears falling unchecked. If I had only confessed sooner, perhaps Reginald... Poirot interrupted gently. Your husband suspected, madam. His confession last night was not to shield himself, but to save you. She looked up sharply. He knew. Oh, Poirot said softly. He knew everything. When he found the chain missing and the small bell displaced, he understood. And when I questioned him, he saw that I was close to the truth. So he confessed, hoping to bear the guilt himself. The last hole. Poirot turned away, his voice low and grave. The authorities will be called, but they will find mercy where they can. You did not kill with malice, madam, only with fear. Still, justice must have its due. Lady Eleanor rose unsteadily. Monsieur Poirot, she whispered, will you at least let me return the bell myself? He regarded her for a long moment, then inclined his head. Yes, madam. But you will not go alone. That evening, as twilight deepened over Madurai, Poirot accompanied Lady Eleanor to the courtyard. The great bronze bell stood upon its pedestal once more, washed and restored. She touched it gently, her fingers trembling. "They say a bell carries the truth to heaven," she murmured. "Perhaps now it will carry mine." Poirot stood beside her, his silhouette still and dignified. "Perhaps, madam," he said quietly, "but remember, truth does not ring for the dead. It rings for the living, so that they may learn." Lady Eleanor drew the rope and struck the bell once. Its deep, resonant tone filled the air, mournful, pure, and final. The sound lingered long after she had turned away. Epilogue: Poirot reflects. The next morning, Tamarind House was silent again. Lady Eleanor had gone with the police, Sir Reginald lay resting upstairs, and Edward prepared to leave for Bombay to manage what remained of the estate. Miss Menon, her reputation redeemed, thanked Poirot quietly before departing. On the veranda, Poirot sat with his notebook. He wrote a single line. "The truth, like the bell, must be struck to be heard, but one must beware the echo." He smiled faintly. "Ah, Hastings would have enjoyed this one," he murmured. A tale of pride, of fear, and of one woman who loved too much. As he rose to leave, the morning breeze caught the bell's tongue, making it chime softly, once, and then no more. Poirot paused, bowed slightly toward it, and whispered, "Adieu, Madame la Cloche. May you ring only for peace henceforth." Then, with his valise in hand and moustache immaculate, Hercule Poirot walked down the sunlit road, leaving behind the echoes of Madurai, and the mystery that would toll no more.